Game over, man. Game over. Johnny.
You're gonna need a bigger boat.
So serious.
I am Iron Man.
This is a tasty burger.
Welcome to the In Session Film Podcast.
Welcome to episode 551 for September 11th, 2023, and I'm JD Duran.
And I'm Brendan Cassidy.
Hey, thanks for joining us this week, everybody. Brendan, another week, another episode. The fall festivals are in full swing.
All foliage, baby.
Fall foliage all around us. Fall coffee, fall everything.
Yeah.
My
And
house
our
is
good-
decorated in fall.
Yep. And our good friend TIFF happening right now that we get to talk about.
Absolutely. We will talk a little bit of the Toronto International Film Festival, which is a festival that I have always wanted to go to. As much as I think I would love Telluride. I definitely want to hit up New York at some point, but I do think top of the list for me would probably be Toronto because, and I've never been to a festival, so I don't know exactly what my lineup would look like or what my time would be, because it does seem as if every single day is, you're scheduled to the brink with watching movies, at least if you're going at it ambitiously. And
Matt Neglia.
exactly, like all of our friends watching 4 movies a day. And I would certainly want to have that experience and take in everything that TIFF has to offer. However, if I could work it out, I would love to go to Toronto because it would allow me to double dip. I could do the film festival, experience a lot of great movies that the fall will offer. However, Toronto is also the mecca for hockey.
I was going to say,
Hockey Hall of Fame is in Toronto.
Yep.
And I would love to visit the Hockey Hall of Fame. So if I could fit that into the schedule somehow, I would love to.
Kill two birds
both
with
of
one
those.
stone.
Exactly.
Yeah, make it a family vacation or something like that.
Absolutely.
Might be hard to make that a family vacation because by going back and forth as much as you might want to be, and if you also want to be ambitious and see at least a few movies, it all of a sudden turns into a bit of a half work trip of sorts.
Yeah, I don't know if a film festival would work great as a family affair.
Nah.
Because you'd want to watch as many movies as you can.
Yeah.
But I'd like to be able to sneak away, and maybe, again, myopically, because I've never been to a film festival of that size and caliber, maybe it is impossible unless you just simply want to skip a day and go tour the rest of the city. But maybe I stay an extra day to do the Hockey Hall of Fame, but and that's certainly possible. You do a week of the festival or however long it lasts, and then the last day before you fly home, you hit up the Hockey Hall of Fame and you still make it work.
And that's why I would have maybe loved to go to South by Southwest at some point. Is it's not just to go to the movie festival side of things, but also to explore the music fest side of it as well. You've got two halves of my artistic spirit being represented in one festival, and I would have to scratch both of those itches while I was there.
Yeah, absolutely. Very much do understand that. And if not TIFF, I think New York would be a lot of fun because we simply have a lot of peers and colleagues that live there.
Yeah, a lot of connections there.
And would love to go and see everybody. So if not Toronto, maybe I can make New York work. I'd love to do that one of these years, if not next year. But when you have 2 young ones at home, it is very, very challenging.
It is, yeah.
If you're wanting to be a film critic, but you want to have a family,
might have to pick what
feasible
level of film critic you want to be,
Exactly.
right? You might just resort to, a weekly podcast like the In Session Film Podcast.
Absolutely. You really have to make some sacrifices there. At any rate, that's been the biggest reason I haven't been to any festival is I got 2 young ones, and it's really hard to.
And I like how your arm was just graciously pointing to Guillermo del Toro's Pinocchio as you said that.
One of my kids right there, and then I got 2 more back there.
If you're a lot of kids.
For those that are listening, not watching us on YouTube,
you have a lot of
the room behind me.
You have a lot of movies stacked up. That's at least 4 kids, 5 kids if you count the How to Train Your Dragon poster in the background.
And that's big enough. It counts as 2.
That's 2 kids?
Yeah,
okay.
2 kids.
Okay. Well, you got Hiccup and Toothless represented, so that's 2
that
kids
is true,
right there.
Yeah. At any rate, we will get to the Toronto International Film Festival. We'll talk more about that here in just a little bit. I want to start off this week's show. There are 2 things I want to talk about here, Brendan, real quick. One, our beloved Hayao Miyazaki. We're going to start there because he has a new movie coming out. We talked about it a little bit. What was that, last week?
Oh yeah, we talked about it
preview last
briefly. Yeah, when we did our fall movie preview, we talked about it very briefly and basically said the most intelligent and eloquent thoughts about why we're looking forward to a Miyazaki film. And the answer we simply gave was, it's friggin' Miyazaki. Of course we're looking forward to it. That was the density of our conversation.
I think that is hilarious and very apt because we found out this last week that Hayao Miyazaki is not retiring, it turns out, and will return for more. And for the same reason, yes, because it's freaking Hayao Miyazaki. Bring him back.
If he has more stories to tell, then I'm all for it, as long as he wants to make them. I mean, the guy's not getting any younger.
No, he's not.
But I've been hearing some pretty darn good early buzz about The Boy and the Heron, which I'm looking forward to.
I've heard some really good things about it. Joe Hayasishi's score is apparently quite elegant and magnificent. He is incredibly overdue for an Oscar.
I still stand by. I still think he might be the best movie composer working today, or just working in general. At least he is my personal favorite.
He's an all-timer.
Every time he scores at least a Studio Ghibli film, I find the music so instantaneously memorable. Nearly every time, even the films that I don't really care for from either, let's say Miyazaki, for instance, I love most of his films, but not all of them. But Hisaichi's score has never been a problem with them. They've always been beautiful.
He's always been fantastic. I love his work. And yeah, he's absolutely due for an Oscar or at least a nomination to be recognized in some degree by the Academy.
Yeah, you would really enjoy. You would really enjoy this, and we mentioned this offline because you sent me a text of this YouTube video talking about this great score by John Williams with regard to the bookends of the Harry Potter movie franchise, right? And it was a great video by Charles Cornell, I believe his name is.
Yeah.
But he has also done. He's wonderful, but he has also done some really wonderful. Almost mathematical dissections on the work of Studio Ghibli, Joe Hisaishi in particular. But he comes at it from a musician that understands jazz music and has a really interesting perspective on how that music, you might not realize, it really does function like jazz music, and it's quite incredible.
Yeah, every one of his videos is mesmerizing to me because he's so calculated and mathematical in what he's talking about. And because I don't have any sort of degree in music theory, it might as well be a foreign language to me. I really have no idea what he's talking about half the time, but he does it in such a fervent way that it's so incredible to talk about. And he's so that passion, I think, makes up for the mathematical of it all because
he knows how to evoke why it's working so well that you don't need the equations behind it to back it up.
Exactly. But it is fascinating, especially if you are able to keep up with his lingo and verbiage. But
I often try to convince people that while music is absolutely an art form, music theory itself, it's math. It absolutely is math. You've got algebra, trigonometry, calculus, astrophysics, music theory. It it has its own place in that.
Yeah,
it's not really a coincidence that every time I took a math class, either in high school or in college, usually the textbook cover was of a violin. Like it's usually always of a violin or a viola or something like that on the cover because music and math do share similar dialects, if you will.
Yeah, no, it's absolutely fascinating. So yeah, long story short, go watch his videos. They're all really quite fantastic. And he's talked about Studio Ghibli among many great composers.
Yep.
So Hayao Miyazaki is apparently, we're going to get, he's coming back. We're going to get more of him, and that is very exciting. The
Do you
next
think he'll be
thing-
directing all of them?
I don't know. That is a great question. He might just simply be producing or writing or taking on some sort of
Yeah, because
manager role.
it kind of makes me think that maybe this is more of like him overseeing a rebirth of Studio Ghibli or something like that, because they have been sort of paused for some time, right? So perhaps there's maybe a bit of a reawakening happening. Of course, who better than Miyazaki to try and pull some strings to get new talent involved to kind of reinvigorate that
Yeah.
great studio.
Yeah, and perhaps there's some reshuffling going on behind the scenes that
Yeah.
we're not really privy to that is a
Mhm.
part of that. Either way, if he's going to be out in front and assumingly making movies, directing more films, even at his age, I mean, I'm all for it. If he's up for it and
Yeah.
wants to do it, I'm there.
Yeah. Yeah, but hopefully it doesn't stress him out too much because God forbid we can't be that stressed.
Yeah, exactly. All right, Brendan, before we get to Toronto, one more quick thing.
Okay.
Rotten Tomatoes. Oh boy, there was a lot of controversy this last week thanks to Vulture. They had an article out talking about the futility of Rotten Tomatoes, how it is the system that Hollywood is manipulating, and apparently there are some PR firms even paying critics to write positive reviews. Oh boy.
Oh,
Where do we
gosh.
begin with this one?
Well, I guess we gotta, refund some of that money back for giving some movies a positive review. We've been found out.
Yeah. Wild.
I mean, it is unfortunate. I do feel like there's not enough being talked about as far as the percentage that this may even apply to, because at the same time, I don't want us to overlook that there have been critics, especially those of diverse voices, that were able to get more of an outlook or an outlet because of platforms like Rotten Tomatoes.
Yep.
And I don't want that to be forgotten. And I feel like this conversation, even if there is truth to it, which is unfortunate, I feel like it only affects a certain pocket, and especially a certain pocket of films, right? Like a certain type of film.
Yeah.
This definitely seems to be more of a finger pointing exercise at certain blockbusters from, let's say, Marvel, for instance, right? It definitely seems to be very finger pointing at that in particular, but that doesn't encompass the totality of Rotten Tomatoes, if you ask me. It's also still been a very helpful tool for people like us, for critics of color, for instance, female critics, and that shouldn't be overlooked either.
Well, and that's the interesting dichotomy of Rotten Tomatoes is that your top critics might not need it as much, but someone like us, it's massive. It gives us a platform that is much bigger than our own, and it gives us a credibility, and
That's it.
a lot of others I know are in that same boat, and it offers those same kind of values. And yeah, there's a lot that is positive that comes with it. And as you noted, over the last, 5-6 years, they've opened the platform up, and they've been able to bring in a lot more diverse set of critics, and not just in terms of demographic, but types of reviews. So more YouTube content, podcasting like us as well.
Yeah.
And of course, more written content. So they've opened up and embraced the technology as YouTube and podcasting has evolved, and it's become a form of criticism that people do listen to as much as written content.
Yeah.
So the diversity of Rotten Tomatoes in that regard, I think, has offered a new perspective that I do think is very compelling. And there are so many great critics on Rotten Tomatoes through these various platforms, whether it be written, video, or audio.
Yep.
And I do love that. I do love that. There is the other end of it, though, where perhaps some critics can be vulnerable to PR firms. And look, if you're taking money to write reviews positively or negatively, and one could assume it's going to be positive. If the critics are paying you, those people do need to be rooted out.
They do. I'm
Rotten
with you.
Tomatoes fundamentally already is at a disadvantage because it is an aggregator. It's not really reflective of quality because
Right.
it's taking
Yep,
an average
yep.
score, right?
Yep.
So in theory, a movie could come out and everyone on the platform could give it a B minus
And it still gets
and
100%.
it gets 100%. And people
This
are
is-
like, oh my gosh,
You're
100%?
Yeah, you're getting into something I also wanted to talk about. I'm glad you're bringing this up. That this is kind of the dangerous thing with aggregators, just in general, right? Is that people get too focused on what does the final score end up being, where in actuality, what I feel like we need to be doing more often, and whether it's on Rotten Tomatoes or just those of us as consumers of content, like we should be looking at these aggregators and seeing individual reviews, seeing individual thoughts where it's like, oh, I kind of like what that person said. I'm going to follow their work from here on out. It's meant to be kind of a form of critical discovery.
Yes.
And I do feel like, a platform like Metacritic makes that easier because it's only like 60 or so reviews. But again, it's usually those quote unquote top critics that get the credibility to be published on Metacritic specifically. But that's kind of the point of it. Like I would love to see Rotten Tomatoes expand to have some kind of like filtration system to be able to see like what types of voices you're really looking for certain films, because certain films call for specific voices that maybe don't necessarily have more validity, but it's a certain point of view that I think are more helpful in emphasizing why that film may work for a certain demographic or not. And that's that sense of discovery, I think, gets lost in the scoring of everything.
Absolutely. But that's all that people pay attention to is the scoring, which of course the studios take note of. And that's why, because of how the system works fundamentally, why it is vulnerable to perhaps some manipulation, because a studio can reach out to a critic, mostly on the fringe is what it seems to be. But it's easy to reach out to those critics to be like, look, I'm not asking you to give this an A. All you have to do is get it to fresh, whatever that works for you in your grading system.
And the thing is, like, it's easy to target those critics, right? To target those that might be kind of at that like middle ground grade. It's just like just a slight twist, a slight convincing of give it a B minus or something. Whatever's going to turn it into a tomato.
Regardless of the, I guess, reputation of the critic, they could be friends or even a top critic.
Yeah.
Although I'm sure it's much harder to buy the critics up at the top. But either way, regardless, you could be Roger Ebert, and if the studio wants to manipulate you, all you have to do is give it that B minus. You don't have to love it. Just get us to the fresh, because that's all that matters in the aggregator is the freshness of it.
Oh man, I wish I could be a fly in the wall to hear if Roger Ebert himself ever got targeted by a PR firm for that exact conversation.
I can only imagine.
I would love to hear his response to that.
Oh my gosh, he would have had the most clever of responses. There's no doubt about it.
I feel like Gene Siskel would have had a more vocal and agitated response. He actually might have been more fun to listen to being a fly in the wall for that conversation.
I mean, Roger has certainly been adamant about things like that. When it comes to the purity of film and criticism, I think he would have absolutely been not a little bit. I think he would have been pretty vocal about that.
Yeah,
which
actually
is
they all would have been, because they take their job so seriously.
Very seriously.
Like Richard Rowe done the same thing too.
Absolutely. Regardless, though, I don't want to get too bogged down in that, because regardless of the critic, the problem with Rotten Tomatoes is that it's vulnerable to manipulate, because all you got to do is bump it up ever so slightly.
Yeah.
From that C or C plus to a B minus. That's all I'm asking. Here's $50. Here's $100. That's all I'm asking. And that's a free, that's tempting, because that's a free $100 to barely change your grade.
Yeah.
And to change it from what would be rotten to, again, into
the fresh score.
Yeah.
And it makes it even more hilarious if you ever find yourself looking at a film that maybe has, I don't know, a 95% on Rotten Tomatoes, but then you look at the average rating and it's like maybe a 5.8 out of 10. It's like, wait a minute, this makes no sense. But the way that Rotten Tomatoes works, that is kind of a possibility, right? A situation like that could happen. And it doesn't really make much sense if you actually take that final percentage at face value, which you shouldn't.
Absolutely. And that's why we always tend to emphasize something like Metacritic more often than we do Rotten Tomatoes. As much as I love being a part of Rotten Tomatoes,
I do
certainly
too.
has value for all the reasons we talked about earlier. But Metacritic is a better system.
It's a better system. It still has its flaws, if I do say so myself. I think maybe some of the scoring criteria as far as what is deemed as generally favorable reviews, like what makes a movie in the yellow versus the green, where's that cutoff? I think that could be maybe tweaked a little bit going forward, because we're seeing a lot more movies nowadays get the universal acclaim at 81 that it almost makes it seem like it means nothing anymore. So maybe that could be tightened up a little bit, but I do agree with you that as far as the way the system works and the ease for how you and I would use it, because we look for specific critics' voices, and it's easier to find, especially given what publication that they're writing for. It makes that platform more easily digestible, if that makes sense. I think the interface is certainly better.
I agree. I very much agree. Anything to add, or shall we move on to Toronto?
Oh, we can move on to TIFF. I'm excited to talk about my lady TIFF here. But yeah, to your point, as we round out Rotten Tomatoes, I do still want to once again reemphasize now that it has been a positive platform for a lot of people, and I don't want that to be forgotten. Despite if there's any issue here, it's less so on Rotten Tomatoes and more so on the PR firms and the way that they're twisting the arms of certain critics that are more vulnerable to this. And you're right that these critics should be removed. And eventually they might get removed. So if Rotten Tomatoes does come together and find an action to take on this, that'll be a great thing.
I agree. I completely agree. I mean, I would like to see the platform be reorganized, and perhaps they can add some filters to it, like you were suggesting earlier, and not just for discovery, but to weed out a higher accuracy as to what these numbers actually mean. A la a Metacritic. Doesn't have to be verbatim Metacritic, but just to be a little bit more emblematic of what the reviews are actually saying. I think would be nice. But on the whole, I am, very much appreciative of the offer of Rotten Tomatoes.
Absolutely.
And I do think there absolutely is value to the platform in terms of discovery. And I just think just a little tweaking is all we got to do. Just got to tweak it.
There's always a little tweaking for something.
Absolutely. And also, shame on studios for buying reviews. What are you doing? Get out of here with that nonsense.
I'm not surprised, but it's sad.
I'm not surprised either, but still, shame on them.
Still sad. Still very sad.
All right, Brennan, let's talk about our favorite drink on the planet. Let's get into some coffee. It's our favorite.
Yeah, would you be surprised if I told you this entire thing was filled with coffee at 11:30 at night?
I would believe you. A lot of the time I am drinking coffee this late. I need to.
It's actually not, but I feel the urge to, honestly, especially if it tastes as good as Coffee Cult.
Yeah, absolutely. Coffee Cult is one of the best because they source only specialty grade Arabica coffee from over 50 countries around the world. It's all about quality. Right?
It is.
I mean, a lot of companies, they'll sidestep some things here and there. They don't inspect their beans as much, because they want to try to get the price down as much as possible. But Coffee Cult doesn't do that. They inspect all of their beans, only using high specialty grade beans to roast. They roast to order. There's no coffee just sitting around in a warehouse.
Nope.
They have a very specific computer program that allows them to wait for your order to come in, goes into the system, it's roasted. That way your coffee is guaranteed fresh every single time. And there's nothing like drinking extremely fresh coffee.
Oh, and it tastes so sweet too. It really
so
does.
good. I mean,
no need to drown it out in any of those milky, sugary, caramely, vanilla flavors that just rot your teeth away.
Exactly. And that's the thing, right? Because we live in a culture that wants to sugar up and milk every single coffee drink that is consumed. And you don't need to do that with high grade gourmet coffee. Like you
No.
just don't need to do that because the coffee itself has those sweet notes in it on its own terms.
Yeah.
And so you don't have look a little milk, little almond milk for me. I don't mind every now and then, but I don't.
It adds a little body. You know, it's more about
Yeah.
the body as opposed to the taste because you don't
Yeah.
want to take away from the taste of really good coffee.
Yeah, and again, I'm not, and it really depends on the type of coffee that you're drinking as well, right? Because
Yeah.
like they have a blend called Road Dog, and Road Dog is a really potent black coffee. It's made for like those long trips, you know, where you're traveling a lot and you're dog tired and you need that pick me up. That's the kind of coffee you go to, and that coffee is made for, you know, you add a little almond milk in there, perfect with that. But if you go to one of their high end like single origin coffees, like their Columbia IPE, for example, you don't want to put anything in that. There are really tangible, potent notes of peach and cherry, strawberry, just these really citrus fruity notes to it that are so exquisite that you don't want to drown any of that out.
Right.
And that's all natural. It's all natural flavor. So that's the kind of coffee we're talking about.
That's good stuff.
Coffeecult.com, coffee with the K, cult with the K, coffeecult.com. Use our code ISF. Again, the code is ISF, and you'll get 15% off. So again, use our code ISF, coffeecult.com. Let's talk about t-shirts.
Nice shirt,
and
JD.
session film
Nice shirt.
t-shirts. Thank you. So I have on right now, and I'll put it in frame here in a moment for those watching it on YouTube. Go to youtube.com/InSessionFilm. You'll be able to check out this brand new shirt, although I'm sure I'll put it out on social media.
Oh yeah, of course.
At
You
some
have
point
to.
anyway.
Look at this beauty. Look at this beauty. You
But
got to showcase this to the world.
What I'm wearing currently is a prototype. So I wanted to see how this would look. I want to ask you all what you think, because if we all like this, I'm going to put it out on the store for everybody.
Oh, I think you need to do it anyway.
I probably should. I probably should.
Just
So
because
this
I also
comes-
want one.
This comes from my beloved Midnight Special here. I'm just going to show everybody on the YouTube. Look at
I'll
that.
always worry about you. That's the deal,
Look
JD.
at that. Oh, here, I got to get it in camera.
Oh yeah,
Look
yeah.
at
You
that.
can't have the microphone hiding good old Michael Shannon and
Look at that.
yeah.
It's fantastic.
Yeah.
So yes, for the audio listeners out there, as Brendan noted, you know, I'll always worry about you. That's the deal.
Yeah.
Our favorite quote from that movie. A little picture of the Michael Shannon and the kid.
Yeah.
I spent a lot of time on this, and I am going to love this shirt a lot. I might order like 17 of them myself.
You just design a
So-
prototype just so you can have a shirt that represents Midnight Special. That's all you cared about.
I wanted to make sure it looked good.
It does
because
look
I
good.
didn't, you know, and I also wanted to make sure that it was what we wanted, because this movie means so much to me. So I wanted to make sure it was, you know, how we all wanted it to be.
Yeah.
So anyway, this is going to be our latest one. We'll have a Midnight Special shirt going out for those that want to check that one out. Go to insessionfilm.com/store, and you'll get you'll be able to see all of the t-shirt items we have up there. We'll have this one, but we also have, you know, stuff with our normal logo. We got a Star Wars font one. We got a Barbie font.
Yeah.
In Session Film. We got women in Session Film stuff up there as well. You can go directly to TeePublic, who is supportive in this effort for us. You can find our store there at teepublic.com/store/InSessionFilm. And you'll be able to check out like our logos on a bunch of stuff. It's not just t-shirts, but there's mugs, there's pens, there's like stickers,
Ties.
like ties, all kinds of fun stuff.
Yep.
So you can go and check all that out. Again, teepublic.com/store/InSessionFilm, or simply go to InSessionFilm.com/store to see all the information, and you will look fabulous all fall season. Okay, let's talk about the Toronto International Film Festival, which has been going on since 1976, I believe.
I believe
Something to
so.
that
I'm trying to
effect?
confirm that as we're talking here. I know we're going to be talking a lot about certain winners from the festival, and I think the
Mm.
first ever winner was in 1978. But I'm trying to
So
confirm.
78. Yeah, okay.
But I
78.
do believe there may have been rumblings of the festival starting maybe a few years prior to that. Maybe it's just, like the award system, the People's Choice Award specifically, that became sort of the defining award of the festival, was more, I guess, recognized within the festival a few years later, I think.
Yeah. And yeah, with the first one coming in 1978
Yeah.
to Claudio Wales' Girlfriends.
Yep. A film I haven't seen, admittedly.
I haven't seen that one either. And the latest winner, so last year's winner at TIFF was, of course, Steven Spielberg's The Fabelmans.
Yeah.
And we wanted to talk about this for a couple of reasons. One, obviously, this year's Toronto International Film Festival is ongoing. And when you look at the People's Choice Award winners over the years, many of them have gone on to be nominated for Best Picture.
Yeah.
So there is a weight that comes to being at this festival and especially winning it,
Yep.
historically speaking. Obviously, not all of them, but many of them have gone on to be nominated and to win. So it certainly is worth getting into. And to what something Brennan mentioned a moment ago, we wanted to talk about the winners because, one, if we're just talking about movies that premiered at TIFF, this would be a podcast that would never end.
Well,
That would
it wouldn't
be
even just be-
ongoing 3 weeks later.
It wouldn't even just be the content. It would also be the criteria of us trying to double and triple check ourselves. Like, oh, did this movie actually premiere?
Yeah,
at
there
TIFF,
would be
or
a
did it-
lot of work that went into
There
it.
would have been a lot of cases, I'm sure, where we realized mid conversation, like, oh wait, we have to go back. That movie I talked about earlier actually premiered at Sundance or something.
Yeah, there would be a lot of manual labor involved with an
Yeah.
exercise like that. And just the amount of movies that have premiered there over the last several decades. That would be a lot of content to decipher. So we decided, hey, look, this has been going on since 1978. If we just focus on the winners, still plenty to talk about. We won't get through all of them, even if we have seen all of them. And I have blind spots, not just Girlfriends, but others that have won the People's Choice Award. Even if I had seen all of them, though, there's no way we're getting through all of these on this episode. However, we are going to focus and emphasize on the People's Choice Award winners. With that said, though, that laid out, Brendan, do you have a favorite? Do you have one that you can confidently say, this is the best one, or at least this is my favorite People's Choice Award winner?
That is a great question. I guess my first question is, and I don't know if my favorite would fall into this category from the year 2000 onward, but starting in the year 2000, we did start to see not just the People's Choice Award winner being announced, but we saw some runner-ups also falling into that. Do we want to include runner-ups in this conversation?
No, I don't think so. That wouldn't be fair to the previous years, especially when we don't know them because they were never publicly announced.
That's fair. That's fair. So yeah, if I'm looking at my trusted Wikipedia page right here, so from the year 2000 on, where we at least have those highlighted in blue on this page to signify which ones we want to focus on and not just the runners up. I will say, I think it's way more fascinating looking at some of the films from, like, let's say the mid 90s and before, when it wasn't as 100% a mirror image of what would happen at the Academy Awards. Everything from this century onward, it almost mirrors what we would see nominated.
It does feel
Best
like there
Picture.
was a change right at the turn of the century.
Yeah. Which is why this
maybe
topic
right
is
before,
almost
but yeah.
dangerous, because it almost feels like we could potentially just rephrase this as, what are some of our favorite Best Picture nominees? And it kind of does fall into that, which is why I do want to start off with some of the earliest winners here. And one that comes to mind right away is probably Terry Gilliam's The Fisher King.
Yeah, love that movie.
Which sometimes I think that's my favorite Terry Gilliam film.
Okay.
Like he makes strange content. We
does.
all know that about him. Sometimes his movies are almost so disorienting and off-putting, such as like a Fear and Loathing in Las Vegas, that we sometimes forget that he also has a soul. And I do think The Fisher King is quite a beautiful movie, and mostly that's thanks to two great lead performances from Jeff Bridges and the late great Robin Williams, both fantastic, and I love their chemistry together. But this is one of those films that I've always had a soft spot for. I think it is a beautiful movie. So I don't know if it's my favorite, but it is the first one I wanted to highlight because it represents what this award meant at a certain time prior to what we sort of see it as now, when there is maybe a little bit more, I guess, love for the experimentation of film and not just the emotionality that it provided. And to be fair, a lot of the winners as of late are still really worthy winners. We'll talk about a lot of them for sure. But this represented a different phase that I just find so fascinating.
I completely agree. I love The Fisher King. I think there's an argument to be made that Brazil is his best. Python and the Holy Grail is one of the best comedies ever made. But
I love Time Bandits as well. I think that's a really interesting movie.
There is something about The Fisher King. It has his Gilliam-isms in it for sure. But there is something about its surprisingly tender center that I really like in that film as well.
Yeah.
Really great performances. So, yeah, I do love that film. That is a contender for one of my favorites on this list as well. As far as my favorite of all of these movies, and I thought about this quite extensively earlier today, and it's tough. I will say it is a tough call here. The movies at the very top of the list are quite strong.
Yeah.
However, and maybe this is top of mind because we did that Spielberg series last year, but The Fabelmans, I truly think it might be the best film on this list, or at least it's my favorite.
I will say, I think
really
it is.
do think that, even though it's the most recent winner here.
No, I'm looking at this now, and I think at the very least, it is the best film to win this award of the 21st century.
Yeah.
Well, I don't know. I also really love Crouching Tiger, Hidden Dragon. So,
that's great too.
Interestingly, I think
the
the two best of this century specifically are the ones that bookend the century thus far.
Yeah, for sure.
Yeah, but I do love The Fabelmans. I think it's a great one.
Yeah, I love that film. I guess I don't really need to get into it too much, as we talked about it quite a lot last year. It was heavily represented at the In Session Film Awards back in January. But yeah, there's something about doing that Spielberg series last year, and you start to recognize how his childhood played such a pivotal role in his life, and it comes through vividly in all of his movies. From early on in his career all the way up to him directly tackling it in The Fabelmans, and it comes through just so incredibly well that I love it. And then Crouching Tiger, Hidden Dragon is very much right there as well. But yeah, I kept thinking about it, and my immediate thought was, it's so new. Do I really believe this? But you look at all of these other winners, and aside from Crouching Tiger, Hidden Dragon, I don't know if there's another film, at least for me, that can best The Fabelmans here.
And looking at all these films that won this award between Crouching Tiger, Hidden Dragon, and most recently The Fabelmans, a lot of these movies I don't dislike. In fact, a lot of them
I really
love
like a lot of them.
I mean, if there's one that I don't care for, it's 3 Billboards Outside Ebbing, Missouri.
Yeah, I knew you were going to bring that up.
Most people might think I'd say Green Book, or most critics would say Green Book, but I don't know. I don't love Green Book, but I kind of enjoy it as like a buddy comedy of sorts. I think taken at that level, I think it's actually kind of enjoyable. So I'll give that film a slight bump over 3 Billboards.
Okay, fair. Fair.
But looking at some of these in comparison to The Fabelmans, I do think Spielberg's film is arguably the best one, even though I do love a lot of these.
Yeah, it's really great. Crouching Tiger, Hidden Dragon would be my number 2. Beyond that, my 3 and 4 and 5. I don't know the order, but I can say pretty confidently.
Can I try and guess which ones they are?
Sure.
And you're talking about your 3, 4, and 5 of this whole list, or just of this century thus far?
No, of the whole list.
Oh, of the whole
Yeah.
list. Well, I'm guessing one of those 3 would be Room.
No.
Oh,
Although that is 6. I have that at 6.
okay. Well,
So
then
you're
the other one I
kinda
was going
close.
to. Okay. I mean, I know how much you like that movie. I'm guessing maybe The Princess Bride would be one of those.
That's 7. Yeah.
What? Okay. What am I doing wrong here? This is a fun exercise. I want to keep doing this. Do you have La La Land a little higher then?
I do. Yeah, that's one of them.
Okay. Well, La La Land's a very
One
good
of
movie.
them, let's just say, might be talked about very soon.
Oh,
Yeah.
oh,
Upcoming episode.
oh.
A little bit of a plug here.
Okay. Ooh. Oh, yeah. You do like Amelie more than I do.
I do.
You
I
do.
love
Yeah.
that movie.
I'll say this right now. I don't think that's going to be in my top 10 of 2001. So.
You are insane. That film is so good. Yeah, I don't know
I
if it'll
remember-
crack my 5, but it'll be in my 10 for sure.
Okay. That's good to know. So at least we know we won't have the exact same top 10 going into that episode now.
I mean, the thing is, that year is so stacked. I feel like in any other year, Amelie would crack my top 5 quite easily, I think.
Okay.
But the fun thing about doing these exercises when we do these retrospectives is that you do come to see these years in a different light all these years later. Obviously, that is a lot of the main point here. And yeah, 2001, I can't wait to get to it because that is a stacked year. There
That's a
are
stacked year. Yeah.
3 films, like my top 3, I would consider to be all timers. I think they're that good. Like they're truly incredible.
We'll talk about this offline, just so we don't spoil our list ahead of time. But I think I know what your top 3 are.
Okay.
I think I know what. At the very least, I think I know what your top 2 are, and I'm genuinely curious to see if I have that. Right.
I think you could easily get my top 3. In fact, my top 4, I think you'll definitely be able to guess. The 5th one that's where it could get a little tricky because there are quite a few films there, such as an Amelie, that could fight for that spot. But yeah, those top 4, truly incredible stuff.
Yeah.
Yeah, so I can't wait to get to it, but that is to say, Amelie, I do love, and that will be in my 10 at the very least.
I am going to
be in my
rewatch that. I remember we gave that film a review some years ago.
Yeah.
I think it was a Patreon review, if I'm not mistaken.
Might have been, yeah.
Yeah,
I think you're right.
and we both had very positive things to say about it. I was just I wasn't blown away by the romance as much as I was when I was younger. I was more infatuated by Amelie herself and her good deeds to random strangers. That was just the thing that I latched onto. But it's still a film I love from an aesthetic standpoint. I do love Audrey Tauto's performance as well. I think it is quite great. So yeah, I mean, of the films that won the People's Choice Awards at TIFF of this century, I do think Amelie is still arguably one of the better ones. Looking at some of these more recent ones between the years 2000 and 2022, like I said, most of these I don't dislike. And it's interesting. It's it's interesting when I filter this out by looking at strictly those that ended up going on to win Best Picture at the Oscars. That's where some of my least favorite ones come into play, ironically.
Yeah.
Like Slumdog Millionaire, I think is fine. The King's Speech is another one I just don't care for. That's a film I've just never cared for.
Very much near the bottom for me as well.
Yeah. 12 Years a Slave, I still really like.
That's the other one. That's the other one.
That's
in my
the other
5.
one. Okay, interesting. All right, good to know. That's a good movie.
Yeah, I do love that one. It's in my top 5 for 2013, which is another year that I think is really strong as well. That film, that year had her and Inside Llewyn Davis and Before Midnight. Just truly stupid that year.
That year was mean. That was a mean year.
God, I loved that year. So I certainly can't separate it from it also being the first year of In Session Film. That adds some fun nostalgia to it. But I think genuinely that year is quite stacked.
I
and
think
12 Years a Slave is up there as one of its best movies.
It's a very good movie. It's a great movie, arguably. I think of the films that ended up going on to win Best Picture at the Academy Awards, I think my favorite of these in that specific category would probably be Nomadland, actually.
Yeah. Yeah,
I think that's a very
another one.
underappreciated film. I feel like we're forgetting about that film a little bit as time goes on.
Yeah, if I was doing a full ranking here, I'd probably put that right in the Room Princess Bride area, like somewhere
Okay.
right around there.
Okay.
Yeah, because I love that one as well. So yeah, it would definitely crack a 10 if we were doing a top 10 of these movies.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I think it's really quite great, and it's interesting because, and this is why I become a little bit cynical when it comes to winning awards, or at least Best Picture.
Yeah.
I feel like if you win for other categories, like people don't complain as much for acting or writing.
Right.
And obviously the tech categories, people don't really get up in arms about as much.
Mm-hmm.
But Best Picture, people take very seriously. And
Best Picture. Yeah.
it's, it's Best Picture. And when you win, if you're not up to snuff, even years later, people will go out of their way to obliterate you. I don't think that has been quite the case with something like Nomadland. And I think it's because it's so subversive to what we think of conventionally with the Oscars. I think that's why Everything Everywhere All at Once, as much as I was scared to death that it would become victim to that discourse last year.
Right.
And it did to some degree, but not quite as extensive as we've seen with others, because it's so weird and distinctive and different. And Nomadland is this movie that is very methodical, and it's about its visual poetry. It's very understated in its performances and storytelling. And there aren't many Oscar winners, especially for Best Picture, that are that style.
Not just that, but I think also the timing of its release may have something to do with it too, because that was a pandemic year, 2020. So
that's
just
true.
the competitiveness of it all was, not to say it was lacking, it was just different. It was a very different vibe. The ceremony was also very different. So there were definitely competing circumstances that could have been at play. I'm not saying they were, because I feel like in any other year, if Nomadland were to win, there might be more people talking about it, but I don't know if it would have been as vocal as, let's say, in Everything Everywhere All at Once, because of the understated nature of it. So I think you're still right there.
Yeah, I agree. Because I don't think, like, if we're looking at other years, I don't think it would have beaten a Parasite, for example. It just would have been nominated.
Right.
But it perhaps could have beaten a Green Book. Maybe, The Shape of Water, perhaps. Although I'll still go to bat for that movie as a winner as well. But yeah, I mean, Nomadland, I think, is a fascinating winner. But I can understand why it isn't talked about as much, not just because it came out during the COVID years, and that's a period of time that in all of our minds we have tried to forget.
That's fair.
We try not to go back there. It was such a weird and bizarre time. But yeah, I mean, it's a movie that doesn't have spectacle. It is the antithesis to spectacle. It is the antithesis to Oppenheimer. Like, it is
absolutely
very methodical and understanding. Like, it's just not a winner that comes to mind like a Parasite, which has so much going on for it. Vigorously.
I'm so glad you bring up Parasite, because I feel like most people would guess, just given this conversation, oh, it wasn't Parasite one of these winners? No, it was actually a runner-up. It lost to Jojo Rabbit, of all things.
Which is, another one of those films that, it didn't win Best Picture, thankfully. But when people look back at TIFF from that year, Jojo Rabbit does get a little bit of that heat because people don't like it.
I will say, I've seen it twice, and I did like it quite a bit more that second time. Looking at it from a very specific lens, I think the marketing for Jojo Rabbit was really its biggest problem, because it kept marketing itself as I think it said like a quote, anti-hate satire. And the problem is that the movie just really isn't a satire. It doesn't have the teeth for satire. And I don't think it's really going for that. It's really more of the youthfulness and the naivete of its central hero that I found more compelling on a rewatch. Which, again, I might be in a minority on that one. That's perfectly fine. But yeah, the point is that you would probably think a movie like Parasite to be one of these movies we'd be talking about, but nope, not quite. It won more coveted awards after this.
I certainly do not loathe Jojo Rabbit in the ways that many others do. And maybe that comes through the prism of, I love Taika Waititi a lot outside of Thor. His Thor films, I think, have put such a bad taste in my mouth that I tend to just want to, I guess, embrace him outside of the MCU. And I have genuinely loved all of his other movies that he's been a part of, and especially that he's directed. Like Hunt for the Wilder People is genuinely
Still my
really
favorite
quite
film of
wonderful.
his.
It is so good. And Jojo Rabbit has similar sensibilities. It's a little bit more popularist, but I do like its absurdity and its sincerity when it is there. It is a little bit bizarre. I don't think it's perfect by any means, and maybe it's a little controversial in some places, especially with TD's performance himself.
Yeah.
I can understand why people do recoil at this film a little bit.
Fair.
But I don't, I'm not going to go out of my way to just completely bash it.
I'm with you. I think it has its merits. It just depends on what merits you're looking for there. This gets even more interesting if I were to go back to the 90s and into the 80s for other winners here. Baz Luhrmann himself is a winner of this award.
I love that. Strictly Ballroom, very good movie. I like that movie quite a bit.
I like that movie. Yeah, we talked about that a little bit when we talked about Baz Luhrmann on the main show when we reviewed Elvis, right? I think we did. Yeah. Was it like a top 3 Baz Luhrmann scenes or something like that? I think it was. And I forget if it was me or if it was you talking about the final dance in Strictly Ballroom and how its main star apparently did that with a broken ankle. Or something. And if that's true, then apparently this must be Tom Cruise's favorite movie because watches just that for research. But yeah, it's interesting to say that someone like Baz Luhrmann is a winner of this award as well.
Absolutely. Yeah. Love Strictly Ballroom. I mean, it has a little bit of that first time director thing, but on the whole, I really like it. I mean, you do see his flair. It's a little bit more understated than what we're used to with him now. But, you certainly see the seeds of who he would become. And I think on the whole, it's a very good movie that it follows The Fisher King, which won the year before.
Yep.
And that's one that I really like. Have you seen, Michael Moore's documentary, Roger and Me?
That one I have not. That is a blind spot for me.
See, that's one that I saw such a long time ago.
Okay.
So that's why I was curious if you had seen it because and could speak to it because I saw it at, I don't know, I was in high school maybe. I don't know. We're talking like 10 years after it had come out, but I'm trying to think, or maybe it was college. At any rate, it was a long time ago that I'd seen it. And it is a documentary that I really like. I can't really speak to the specifics of it, but I do remember liking it. And it's interesting when you look at this. The reason I wanted to bring it up is because there are 2 documentaries that have won this award. Obviously, they have separated them since. But it's interesting when looking at the history of this award. And it's not just your conventional studio movies that have gone on to be nominated or to win Best Picture, but there are 2 docs here. There's even several foreign language films that have been nominated for Best Foreign Language Film at the Oscars.
Yep. So some going on to be nominated for Best Picture, such as A Crouching Tiger, Hidden Dragon, or Parasite. Going on to win. Life is Beautiful is another one that falls in that category too.
Yeah, exactly. Cyrano de Bergerac, I think, was nominated for Best Foreign Language Film. Even on the Verge of a Nervous Breakdown, which Ryan and Jay have
Pedro Almodovar
during their Almodovar series. So that's certainly up on the podcast feed if people want to go and check that out. That was a really fun series on the whole.
It was, yeah. They had some great things to say about that movie too.
There. So I think there's just a really interesting history with this award, and it's interesting when you look at just the winners, you can get a sense of how it evolved from 1978 to now. And there are, I do think there are some interesting pivot points that you can point to directly.
I think it happens with one specific movie is when I think that pivot point happened. And I feel like it started with American Beauty.
Yeah. I mean, maybe Life is Beautiful just because that was heavily nominated at the Oscars as well.
Well, and at the same time, though, I don't necessarily think Life is Beautiful is much of an I don't think it's as much of an outlier when you look at what was leading up to it in years prior, as far as looking at TIFF and the People's Choice specifically. But American Beauty was such a unique
that was a big
type
one.
of, that was a big one. And then I feel like after that, there was like a new trend that these winners were following, not necessarily for better or worse, just something different. And I feel like American Beauty was perhaps the if there was any one film that we can call a pivot point, I feel like that one might be the closest.
And it was the first winner of Best Picture since Chariots of Fire in 81.
True.
So like there had been a pretty long gap between the two. And you look at the evolution of film over those, almost 20 years.
In fact, most of these leading up to American Beauty, whether they would go on to be nominated for any type of Oscar, most of those Oscar nominations were Best Foreign Language. If you noted, like there was a lot, there was a lot more representation from TIFF for foreign language films and documentaries, and occasionally English speaking films, right? But I feel like American Beauty was like the starting point of some new trend. And it's just really interesting.
No, I do agree. Even with the success of Life is Beautiful, I do think that's where things really started to pivot. And maybe not so coincidentally, because it is the year after that where they decide to open up the runner-ups.
That's true.
From the festival. So perhaps they took something from that, the leaders of TIFF. I don't know the behind-the-scenes mechanics and the history of it well enough to know if that truly did spark something in terms of how they wanted to go with the winners going forward. But I could see that certainly being the case, given the success of American Beauty. It wins the People's Choice, goes on to win Best Picture, was this big, massive hit that year. That, hey, if we open this up beyond just the winners, but also to the runner-ups, it might give a little bit more of that prestigious flavor that they wanted to go for. Perhaps that was part of the conversation.
It may have been. Yeah. It's interesting to know that this trajectory may have changed with American Beauty, which is a very contentious film.
And that's an interesting film in this conversation, because I don't think that film holds up at all.
Well, I like a lot of the aspects of it, and I'll say what you will about Kevin Spacey, the man, but I actually think he's pretty funny in the movie. I think he gives a good performance. I don't think the performances are the problem. I actually don't think the filmmaking's really much of a problem. I actually like a lot of what Sam Mendes is doing in it. I think the problem with that movie is that it really has nothing to say. I think what it has to say can be boiled down into a simple appreciate what you got kind of message. That's really all it is. It just does it in such
It is very simple.
Yeah, and that's really my biggest problem with it. I think if the film took itself less seriously, I think it's more successful.
Yeah, it carries the veneer of this prestigious, pretentious Oscar winner.
We can use that word. We'll use
all the P words.
Yeah. Pompous. Yeah. Nice. Wow, jinx.
Yeah, save that one for the In-Session Film Archive. That was pretty great.
My gosh, sandwich that and just put that right on the homepage.
Exactly.
You'll know you're getting into something where synergy is all that matters.
We have talked about forever how Brendan and I share the same brain. It's just nice for once that it came out in the exact same moment.
The most literal way.
Yeah, so all of the P words, it carries the veneer of that, but really underneath it's quite hollow and very simple. And I think that's my biggest issue with the film. It feels like a nothing burger to me. And the content is very controversial now, obviously.
For sure.
Perhaps was controversial then as well. I don't know. In 1999, I was a wee little teenager.
And I don't necessarily mind the controversy as much as just the thematic emptiness I feel when I watch it. That just makes the controversy feel more. It feels a little ickier because of that, right? As if to say, just using it for like superficial reasons.
Yeah, I that's a really great point, because art doesn't have to be clean,
right?
And it doesn't have to be this everything is great and we're only promoting good family values.
Mm-hmm.
Like, movies don't have to do that. In fact, we don't want art to do that all the time.
Right.
Sometimes it is going to be murky. It is going to be a little bit prickly.
Yep.
Your characters aren't going to wear halos and angel wings all of
Right.
the time. They're going
Right.
to make mistakes. They're flawed.
Yep.
And that is certainly the case with American Beauty, but the best films take those prickly characteristics and they do something with them, either dramatically or especially thematically, and they mold them into something that is provocative or profound or whatever the case may be.
Yeah.
American Beauty, to your point and what we've been talking about, does none of that.
I'm with you.
Absolutely none of that.
I'm with
and
you.
That is why it's a problem.
Yeah.
Because
I'm with
now
you.
you're just showing characters doing very dubious things, really for no reason, or for
That's
very
basically all it
simple
is. Yeah.
reasons. Yeah.
Yeah, and to summarize that entire movie with a plastic bag in the most literal way. Yeah, so we could stop talking about American Beauty. It's not as beautiful as it thinks it is. Are there any films that won this award that you think maybe are a little underappreciated or underseen?
Brendan, what is going on here?
Was that what you were going to
Because
ask that
I
same
was
thing?
literally just about to say that one of my favorite movies on here that is perhaps underrated is Nikki Caro's Whale Rider.
Oh, I like
So
that movie
what
too.
is happening right now?
I wasn't going to pick that
Get
one.
out of my brain.
I wasn't going to pick Whale Rider for mine, but I do think that's a very good movie. We caught up with that one just last year.
Last year.
Yeah,
Yeah.
we
No,
did
I
it.
really love that film quite a bit and ended up in my top 20. So that's one of those that I would say is a little underrated here, because people people don't recognize or talk about that movie. It had no significant impact on the culture at the time. It wasn't nominated for a bunch of Oscars, but I do think it is quite good and one of the best films of its year. So I do think that one is a little underrated.
Yeah.
As far as some others, man, it's hard to say because everything after that, I feel like in today's culture with the world of the internet has been so talked to death.
Yeah.
The other one for me probably would be Strictly Ballroom, but we've already talked about
We already
that
talked
one.
about that, but I think that does fall into that camp
But
for
it's
sure.
the same, yeah, because that's another one of those. It's Baz Luhrmann's first movie, and no one really talks about it today. Even in the context of Baz Luhrmann, when people talk about him, they talk about either Now Elvis, or they talk about Gatsby, or Romeo and Juliet, and of course, Moulin Rouge,
Yeah.
which we'll get to in a few weeks as well, probably.
Maybe.
Maybe we'll see.
Won't be in my top 10, but I do like that movie.
Yeah, I do like it a lot too. But those are the movies people go to, and I just don't think it's Strictly Ballroom is as seen as some of his other movies, which is understandable. It's a small little film from
it's his first
1992.
film. Yeah. It's
his
Baz
first film.
Luhrmann doing independent cinema, which is a weird thing to say.
It is
but-
interesting how he was
Yeah.
very much there at the beginning of that movement in the
He
early
was.
90s.
I think most people forget about that.
Yeah, but he was certainly a part of that movement, and so yeah, I think Strictly Ballroom is, it's a very good film, and certainly a movie that fits the bill for underrated.
Yeah. Director Gavin Hood, right? He's done a lot of commercial
course.
films, and
Yes.
most of them haven't been that great. But have you seen his South African film Sotsi from 2005?
I don't think so. I don't think.
Okay.
Yeah, that's one that I haven't seen.
Well, that's one I do think is a little bit underrated. Now, when we did our 2005 retrospective some years ago, this didn't crack my top 10. In fact, I don't even know if it cracked my top 20. But I do think this is a very strong South African film. It basically tells the story of a young gangster who finds himself caring for a baby and kind of shapes his whole mentality. The film is kind of sentimental. It has a schmaltz to it, but I think it earns it pretty well, and it would then go on to win Best Foreign Language Film at the Oscars. But I do think this one's actually pretty underrated, and it falls into kind of this camp of what filmmakers were doing prior to them getting eaten by the Hollywood system. right?
Yeah. Sure.
And this is, I think, quite a strong film from Gavin Hood. I think it's a very good one. And if you haven't seen it, I think you might be moved by it. It's got a pretty strong pathos to it by the end.
Yeah, that is really interesting. And it is funny with what you're talking about because the movies following that is Rendition in 2007. Then he goes to X-Men Origins Wolverine. Yikes.
Which, okay, to be fair, no one directed that movie.
That is true.
Yeah.
That was absolutely taken away from him.
Yeah.
And then he gets to 2013 with Ender's Game, which I think, speaking of underrated, for 2013, I think that is a much better film than its reputation is.
That movie is compelling primarily because of how good the source material is, and it is a pretty faithful adaptation, so I will give that film some credit there. But yeah, there's something challenging about that movie that I do think makes it a little bit underrated.
Yeah, and then he goes from that to Eye in the Sky and then Official Secrets. So he has been kind of gobbled up by Hollywood.
Oh, he has been making a slight comeback because those last two you mentioned are actually pretty good.
Yeah, I think they're quite fine films. Eye in the Sky I think is actually pretty good. I did enjoy that as well. Mm-hmm. Yeah, really interesting trajectory there with Gavin Hood.
But yeah, but I'm trying to think if there are any others I would throw into the underrated / underappreciated camp.
Yeah, I don't know. I mean,
I kind of like Precious more than most.
It's again my head because
we're
that
three
was going
for three.
to be
We're 3 for 3.
That was going to be the next one I was going to bring up. I think you can make a case for Precious. I don't know if I love it as much as a lot of others do, but I think it is a movie that is more well liked than Rust, if that makes sense.
Yeah,
like people talk about it as much, but I feel like when it is brought up, people do tend to, offer praise to it, especially for a Best Picture nominee.
I will say, with regard to Precious, and I'm trying to confirm what I'm about to say so I don't, backtrack on my words here, but this was yet another film that was nominated for Best Picture. It didn't win. That was the year of The Hurt Locker, which I do think is a better movie.
Yeah, I agree.
But at the 82nd Academy Awards, looking at Best Actress specifically, that was the year of Sandra Bullock for The Blind Side.
Oh, God.
And looking at the nominees there, you had Sandra Bullock for The Blind Side, who ended up winning. You also had among the nominees Helen Mirren for The Last Station. You had Carey Mulligan for In Education, Meryl Streep for Julie and Julia, and then Gabourey Sidibe for Precious. And of those 5, man, I probably would have voted for Gabourey Sidibe, honestly.
I think that's fair.
Yeah.
I think that's fair. Like, yeah, it's a really astounding performance. I mean, say what you will about the movie, and I still think it's a good movie. Again, like I said, I think there's an argument to be made still regarding underrated and the winners here that we're talking about. Regardless, though, that performance slays. It's really great.
Yeah. Well, I feel like that movie got mostly all the acting attention because of Monique's performance in Best Supporting Actress, who did end up going on to win the Oscar that year. And if you ask me, I actually think Paula Patton gave the slightly better supporting actress performance in that movie, which I think is even more ironic. But yeah, long story short, I do think Precious is. I think it's a very good movie overall. I think there is a power to it that we sometimes forget about.
I agree. No, I'm definitely there with you on that. Okay. So the other one I want to talk about, and I won't spend too much time here, but anytime that we are given the opportunity, I will do so. I will briefly mention once again La La Land. And what's the saying, Brendan? The best thing that ever happened to that movie, that it lost the Oscar Best Picture to Moonlight, because it did win the award at TIFF.
Mm-hmm. Well, it did win the Oscar for about 3 minutes.
For about 3 minutes. And then it lost. And you know what? La La Land's reputation since then, shockingly, has been much better. Who would have thought? Who would have thought? Now, there are,
I like La La Land quite a bit.
I like it a lot, too. There are, of course, people out there, such as our good friend Ryan McQuaid, who will always completely and deeply loathe La La Land. Mm-hmm. However, Ryan McQuaid aside, and I still love him to death, but Ryan aside, most of the vitriol toward La La Land was only because It was winning all these awards, and it was a huge competitor to everyone's beloved Moonlight. That was the only reason. I will maintain that to death. And will completely, and I will reiterate it here once again. I think that is a great movie. I really love it a lot. Earlier, I mentioned that if I was ranking these, that La La Land probably would be in my top 5, and I still maintain that. I still love that movie. I still think it's one of the best of 2016. It's not quite my number 1, but I do love it, and I still think it's one of the best of its year.
It's so well made.
Incredibly well
So
directed.
made. Yeah.
And I think I especially love Damien Chazelle. And while he wears his influences on his sleeve, I still love what it is an execution on its own terms, but especially in context of musicals of this century. Because you look at this comparatively to something like Chicago, which I don't like all that much.
Yeah, I'm not a big fan either.
I don't think that one is very good, and a lot of it is the choreography, and then especially the editing. The editing of that film is a disaster.
I agree.
And what I love about La La Land, yes, at times it has this magical realism to it, but it channels a style of filmmaking that is way more 1957 than it is 2016 or the 21st century. Everything is in frame. All the choreography is happening as you see it. And modern musicals just aren't shot that way often.
No, they're not.
La La Land, it does harken back to an era where I think musicals were at their best.
Well,
And
yeah,
I think
because nowadays you look at musicals and you look at La La Land by comparison, it almost looks like it was made on the cheap.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And I love that. I absolutely adore that. And I think the music is genuinely fantastic. The performances are very good. Maybe they shouldn't have won. And I can certainly, I can seize that argument for sure. However, I still think the performances are great. The music is awesome. I love how everything is in frame, that it's shot like it's 1954.
Yeah.
And it's a beautiful movie. I think it is an absolutely gorgeous movie, and it ends on this ambiguous note that again harkens back to other musicals of its time, particularly the Umbrellas of Cherbourg. So,
yeah, I mean, it
I think
basically takes
there's
the
lots
ending
of-
of that film and reinterprets it for this. But
Yes.
if you're gonna steal a movie ending, at least Damien Chazelle is picking one that most American audiences might not be familiar with. So
Exactly.
it's fine.
Absolutely. I don't have a problem with it. Not only that, but given its story and what it is telling about Hollywood, I think it's thematically very apt and very appropriate.
Well, it is the right ending. Yeah,
It is the right ending.
yeah.
And so there is an emotionality to it that I think is quite good.
And
the
to be honest,
performances
like,
make it work.
does it like I know I said if you're gonna steal any movie ending, at least pick the right one. Does La La Land really even steal the ending to the Umbrellas of Cherbourg?
No,
I mean,
I don't think so. I mean,
superficially, it's just because you have two romance musicals, where the leads don't end up together. That's really the only comparison.
That's it. Yeah, no, I agree. I mean,
Yeah.
again, the influence is there, but that's
Yeah.
as far as I'm willing to go. I don't think that the two films are really anything close to each other aside from that. I do think they're distinctly two very different musicals. I mean, mostly it's the influence in terms of the colors and aesthetics, the style, again,
Right.
everything being in frame. And yeah, the broad scope narrative in terms of the romance and then the splitting. But the details, again, the execution, the how it's about, if you will,
Oh, we're back to the how.
are very different. Very, very different. And again, when you take that in comparison to a lot of other musicals today, it's just distinctly in its own camp.
Yeah.
And that goes a long way for me. That goes a long way for me as well. So
That's important. That's important.
it is. So yeah, I mean, I wouldn't vote it as the best film of 2016, but I do think it's in the top 5 and a very
Okay.
good film. And of course, it's a winner of this award, so might as well. talk
Might as well
about it.
highlight it. It's a good movie.
Especially when you look at the winners that followed, because the next 3 are 3 billboards, which, as we've noted, Brendan absolutely hates.
It's not
And
a
then we
good
get
movie.
to Green Book.
And the Banshees of Inisherin just makes me hate it all the more because that movie is so good.
Yeah. Yeah. I don't know if I hate it as much as Brendan, but I'm not very high on Three Billboards either. I don't
Now, to
think
be
that
fair,
film is all that great.
I don't think it's one of the worst films of its year. I wouldn't go that far with it. To me, it's like a 2.5 out of 5 star movie on, like, let's say Letterboxd.
Yeah.
So I'm kind of down the middle on it, but there's so many things about it that I don't like that just kind of agitate
agree.
me. It's kind of one of those like really strong hit or miss affairs where the hits are so good and the misses are so bad.
I agree. I agree. Yeah, because there are elements to it that I really do like in a vacuum.
Frances McDormand's performance is good.
Frances McDormand is very good. That ending sequence again in a vacuum, I think, is quite astounding.
Yeah.
The score, I think, is very good. I could listen to Carter Burwell's score all day long.
Yeah.
But as a whole, I do think it is quite messy.
Actually, like interestingly, I know we're getting a little off topic, but we are talking about a film that did win at TIFF, so I guess it is technically still on topic. But as much as I don't love Three Billboards as a movie, it actually does have one of my favorite scenes from that year, and it's a scene that I don't think people talk about that much. It's sort of the early interrogation scene at the police station between Woody Harrelson and Frances McDormand, and there's
Yeah,
this
sure.
obvious form of contention between them, as if they hate each other. And instantly, out of nowhere, he coughs on her and coughs blood.
Yeah.
And it's
Oh,
her
yes.
reaction
Yeah,
where she's like, "Oh, it's okay, don't worry." It's as if they're just briefly letting go of their anger and hate for each other for a good reason. Like,
honestly, love that. I agree.
no one
Yeah.
talks about that scene. Like the movie needed more of that.
I agree. I agree. No, I'm with you. There are some really good. There's really good stuff. I can see the appeal and why people like it. It doesn't come together for me, but yeah, there are some really strong highs in it. Some low lows, but some really strong
Very
highs
low
as you're
lows.
talking about.
Man.
The three after La La Land, Three Billboards, then everyone's favorite Green Book. And
Cheers.
then after that, everyone else's favorite Jojo Rabbit. So it's, the 3 years after La La Land maybe leaves a little to be desired. And then you get to Nomadland.
Love it.
Which I love. The year after that, I'm afraid to mention this, but Kenneth Branagh's Belfast. Controversial. I get polarizing is maybe the better word.
Yeah.
A little polarizing. I will have to shout out Griffin Schiller out there because there's at least someone else on this planet that'll go to bat for Kenneth Branagh besides me.
That's fair. That's fair.
Because I really like Kenneth Branagh as a filmmaker, and I don't think he gets enough credit. He's not out there stroking masterpieces like a Martin Scorsese, but I think he's more visually intuitive and more dramatically compelling than he's given credit for.
I like
Mostly.
Belfast. I don't love Belfast, but I do like it a lot overall.
But I love Belfast. I still think there's an argument to be made. It's his best movie, and it's not a film that's going to crack my top 10, but I will comfortably have that in my 11 through 20. I think it sits at like 18 for me, something like that.
That'd be a fun series to do now that I think about it, is a Kenneth Branagh series, because
I agree.
I don't think we talk about him enough. That would be sort of the initiating
I would love to
factor
do
for
that.
it. Yeah.
You name the time and place, and I'm there.
Wait till I get married. I can't add more homework right now.
Okay, that's fair. We'll invite Griff to participate with us if he can find the time.
Yeah.
And then of course last year we get The Fabelmans, and that catches us up since 2015. So, you noted this earlier, so we might as well go in reverse order. So 2015 is Room, which I love that film quite a lot as well. And I think part of the appeal for me with Room, well, it's a little bit twofold, right? In the sense that it was a little bit of a surprise that year. Really had no idea about its existence at the time. Really wasn't sure what Lenny Abramson was going to bring to this material.
Right.
It's also interesting because Brie Larson was, she was off the heels of something like Short Term 12 in 2013, but she was still finding her way to stardom at that time. But still there was an appeal. Jacob Tremblay, we had never heard of him before.
Nope.
We all love him now, but at the time, no one had heard of him. and I had no idea what to expect out of this story. So in terms of the surprise factor, absolutely one of my favorite surprises of the year. The other thing for me, when this film was eventually released to the public, I was a brand spanking new father.
I was gonna say, like, this was
boy.
when Sam was at that stage of infancy.
Yeah.
So, like, quite
He-
literally.
Yeah.
That's why I thought Room would have been one of your 3 favorites, just given the emotional connection you had to the movie at the time of Sam being born.
Yeah, so I'd have to do the math, and I wonder if Letterboxd would tell me. I don't even know if I would have logged it accurately, because the release date for this film in the United States after its premiere at TIFF, and I think it also played at Telluride that year, but its release date was October 16th. Sam was born on October 18th.
God dang.
So
God dang.
there is a very good chance. Now, I do know that the last film that I watched before Sam was born was not this. It was the Guillermo del Toro film that year. The Gothic horror movie. The name is
Crimson Peak.
Crimson Peak. Thank you.
Yeah.
That was the last film I had seen before Sam was born. But there is a possibility. Again, I'd have to verify this, but there's a possibility this was the first film I watched coming back from Sam being born. That is possible.
I found your Letterboxd review that you logged on November 18th, 2015.
So it would have been. Wait, what was the date again?
November 18th, 2015 is when you logged it.
So that would have been a month after he was born, which, again, I can't really recall. Did I take a break afterwards?
I don't know.
Even know if you would remember.
I will say, you definitely took at least a slight break. I think at least a month or a couple weeks, whatever Brandy would have let you do.
Yeah.
But I'm reading your review that you logged, and it doesn't fully come off like a guy who just became a father. It is a little more passive. Maybe you were just trying to hold back emotion at that point.
Maybe.
I don't know.
That could be true.
Yeah, it's definitely a bit more, I guess, pragmatic in the way it's written.
And look, there is a very good chance that at the time I was trying to maintain some level of just trying to be as level-headed about it as possible. Also,
Maybe.
2015 was an interesting year because I think there was so much happening in terms of my familiar life and the emotional intricacies of everything happening of that year.
Yeah.
That when it came to film, there were a couple of movies that evolved quite drastically over time. And this certainly could be one of them, because the other big one from that year that had a very similar trajectory was Mad Max Fury Road.
Yeah.
So infamously, that is a movie that I liked, did not love. I still remember that conversation quite vividly.
I remember the way you open your thoughts on the podcast. You said something, and I'm paraphrasing here, something along the lines of, the word masterpiece is being thrown around a lot.
Yeah.
And I'm not there.
I'm not there. However, by the end of the year, different story.
Yeah.
And that ended up in my top 5, I believe, or close to it. Like maybe
it was
6
definitely in
for
your
me.
top 10.
Yeah, it was very much in my top 10. And so Room could have been a little bit of that. Like, I think I was, again, I'm guessing because this was such a long time ago now. But there was probably a level of, trying to be a little pragmatic about how I felt about the film in terms of its entirety and not just relying on my emotions. Because I remember, like it was yesterday, the actual experience. Like watching this in a theater obliterated me, absolutely knocked me out. And so, it ended up becoming one of my favorite films as a result. But It might have been one
Yeah,
of those
I remember that.
where, you have the experience, you try to think through it analytically, and maybe you offer up a little bit of reservation or criticism, whatever the case may be.
Not sure.
And then, and as we get into these shows, when we talk about it here on the podcast, I feel like more times than not, that often changes the course of how I think about a movie. So
yeah. I cannot wait to see what movies change for me when I become a dad.
it changes you. I'm telling you,
I know.
it changes you wholly.
I know. I cannot wait for that. We heard that firsthand when we heard Jay Ledbetter cry on the podcast for the first time.
One
He
of
was
my
known
favorite
as
moments.
known
ever.
as Mr. Cynicism for a while, and that streak ended when he talked about some Terrence Malick.
I'm telling you, it changes the way you see the world. It changes your whole worldview. And that was one of my favorite moments. I know Jay is maybe a little embarrassed by it, but
Oh, he should not be.
he should not be. It was a phenomenal moment of vulnerability after he had become a father. And it does. It just absolutely changes you. And while we're getting a little bit off topic here, I will absolutely use this as a transition, even though during the break we talked about this a little bit, but I'll do it again because it makes sense for what we're talking about here.
Yeah.
Go to the In Session Film store. We might have some new T-shirts because sometimes you watch movies and it changes you.
It literally changes you.
It
changes you so much. You just have to create a shirt for
You
it.
create a T-shirt about it. So yeah, Midnight Special. The Bike Riders coming up soon. Looking forward to that once again.
Yeah, we're not sponsored by Jeff Nichols in any way.
We should be though.
We really should be.
I got to figure out how to become sponsored by Jeff Nichols.
I feel like we'd be friends.
I know.
Yeah.
I would love to talk to that man.
Oh, me too.
I would pay money to interview him. So if there's any PR people out there listening,
oh gosh,
we talked about Rotten Tomatoes earlier. How about I do the one that's manipulating you?
They're too busy buying critics. You can go off and buy directors. How about that?
Go buy directors. Yeah. At any rate, that is to say that I loved Room. And it was
Good
a
movie.
pretty fast. That was a month. That was a month after that Sam was born. So that is very interesting.
Yeah.
Do you have any other films you want to mention here?
I'm taking a look at the list once again. I feel like we talked about pretty much all of them that we needed to. I do want to emphasize once again, if I were to do let's say my top 3 favorites here, I did mention The Fisher King would probably be one of them. Maybe Crouching Tiger, Hidden Dragon. I think my favorite would be The Princess Bride of all of these, which is such an interesting one. I honestly, I sometimes keep forgetting that it's among this list because of what it's surrounded by, like the decline of the American Empire, and then after that, women on the verge of a nervous breakdown. But in between that, sandwiched by that, is The Princess Bride. It is a very interesting sandwiching there.
I mean, from 86 to 90. I mean, and really, I guess you could go all the way to 92.
Yeah.
Because you have the decline of the American Empire, which was a nominee for Best Foreign Language Film. Then The Princess Bride, Woman on the Verge of a Nervous Breakdown. Then the Michael Moore documentary, Roger and Me. Then Cyrano de Bergerac, Fisher King, Strictly. Like, that is a wild group of films there.
I'm actually kind of surprised if the decline of the American Empire was one of these winners, we didn't see its sequel nominated anywhere, because you remember the Barbarian Invasions, right? The year 2003. That's the sequel to that movie, pseudo sequel of sorts. And I remember you liked that quite a bit. I thought it was pretty good. But I guess I'm not surprised. A little surprising that we don't see that represented here, maybe for the year 2003, to kind of keep the trajectory going there.
Yeah, no, that is a really good point. I didn't even make that connection until just now. So, but yeah, no, it's a fascinating crop of films. It's interesting to see the evolution of it. One film we haven't talked about on here is the Lawrence Kasdan film, The Big Chill. Are you a fan of The Big Chill?
Admittedly, a blind spot for me. It's a blind spot.
Yeah, that's a movie I really do like. I haven't seen that film in a long time, so I have no idea how I would feel about it now. But college JD liked it. Good movie.
I feel like I've noticed with me when I'm a lot younger and I like movies when I see them for the first time, that usually means I'm going to be on one end of the extreme when I watch it again for the first time after like 20 years. So I tend, if I fall like in the middle ground of sorts where it's like, I like that, I thought it was pretty good. If I watch it again in my current headspace, I'm like, what was I thinking? This movie's great. Or what was I thinking? This is terrible. It usually falls into one of those categories for me.
Yeah, no, and it's always interesting because like The Big Chill was okay, so there's a couple different things because again, I watched this in college and I was recommended this film from a friend of mine. In fact, yeah, I believe, now that I'm thinking about it, man, I'm really going down memory lane here. I feel like I'm in Inside Out. And you got one of those like murky yellow ones where the balls where it's starting to fade, but now it's starting to come back a little bit. Like as you kind of get into it.
Okay, yeah, nice work.
Because I believe that In Session Film co-founder Nate Parsons, friend of the show, God love him. I think he was the one that recommended this to me because it's Lawrence Kasdan. We've liked his work. There's an element of football in this film. Again, trying to recall the exact details, but I think there's something about like a Michigan football game kind of being in there. And so he's like, you got to watch it, even though it's like a small little like gag or whatever.
Yeah,
you got to watch it. And then of course it's got a great cast, right? Tom Berenger, Glenn Close, Jeff Goldblum, William Hurt, among many others. And so, this was like 2004 or something like that. And I'm pretty sure we went to like our local library. Remember those? Those used to exist.
Library? Yeah, I forgot about that book.
I'm pretty sure that's where we got it from. Because at the time,
yeah, you could rent DVDs from. Not even rent. You could check out DVDs from the library.
Yeah, absolutely. And I'm almost positive that's exactly what we did with this movie.
Interesting.
Or I don't know if it was DVD, but whatever it was,
whatever the platform was at the time, maybe VHS at that point.
I want to say it might have been VHS. Honestly, I think that's all they had of this movie available. So that's what we did, and we went back and we had a few beers and we watched The Big Chill, and I ended up really liking it.
Yeah, I got to see that one. I really got to see that one.
19. Or something like that.
It definitely seems like the kind of movie that would be up my alley, just given the content of it. It just seems like it'd be my thing.
Yeah. So that's one I would love to revisit that one. I do think that's one of those movies I would probably love a lot more now as an adult.
Okay.
And
interesting.
Yeah. Anyway, good movie.
Okay.
It was a fun little trip down memory lane. I don't think I have any other thoughts on any of these others. We haven't already talked about.
But I am interested to see what's going to win this award this year, because if it's any indicator, it means it's going to be nominated for Best Picture at the Oscars.
And it likely will be, right? Because there's a lot of films playing at TIFF right now that seemingly are in the conversation at the very least. I guess it'll depend on what actually wins.
Yeah.
Because TIFF hasn't been 100% accurate on all these things.
No, we can at least. I think at this point, given the recency and how some of these turned out, whatever goes on to win will at the very least probably be nominated for.
What was the last film to win this award but not be nominated for Best Picture?
Looks like Where Do We Go Now from 2011, a film I have not seen.
Yeah, that is correct.
Yeah.
Wow. Yeah, it's been a while. It's been a minute.
It's been a minute.
It's been a minute. And then from there, you'd have to go back to Eastern Promises, right?
That's an interesting one to see win this award. Yeah.
Yeah. So since 2007, only 2 films that have won the People's Choice have not been nominated for Best Picture. So,
Wow.
yeah, I mean, that is to say, whichever film wins, you're likely going to be nominated.
You're likely going to be nominated.
That's how it works.
I think it's a
Absolutely.
fair prediction to make.
Okay, well, with all of that laid out, I guess we can kind of get to the end of the show here.
Yeah, nice talking about you, Tiff.
Yeah, it was nice talking about you, Tiff. Just a friendly reminder that we love our patrons.
We do.
You are the best. If you want to help support us, patreon.com/InSessionFilm is a great way to help us out each week. We have some exclusive Patreon content that comes out there on Patreon.
Yeah.
This week, if you're a fan of Harry Potter, if you're listening to this and you're a fan of Harry Potter, I urge you to go subscribe to our Patreon, even if it's just for this 1 month. And again, you can sign up for as low as $1. $1 a month, you get access to our exclusive content each month. But I had, we talked for like 30 minutes, not just about Harry Potter.
Oh, no, dude. It was more than that.
It was more than that, I guess, for a little bit of context, because we haven't really talked about it here as much. But in our Patreon content, I've talked about my experience of reading the books. And I just went through all of them, or at least 6 of them, over the summer, which is noteworthy for me because I don't read books. I don't do books all that often. But I went through all of the Harry Potter books this summer. It was a really fun time, and I talked about my experiences on Patreon. I just finished reading Deathly Hallows, and so we did this week's Patreon episode was dedicated to me talking about what that experience was like, and specifically, we spent quite a fair amount of time on Severus Snape. Who, as I noted, is one of my very favorite fictional characters of all time, ever. Top 3, full stop.
Wow.
That's how much I love him.
Yeah.
I love him. Severus Snape is one of the best. I will champion him for as long as I live.
And we talked about Snape for at least 25 minutes of that Patreon bonus content. And when I say we, I really mean JD.
It was quite a lot. So please go and check that out. Again, that's patreon.com/InSessionFilm. It was a great time.
Yeah.
Podcast reviews. We'll have a review of The Eight Mountains coming very soon. We have a review of Bottoms out from last week that you can go and check out. Women in Session, their latest episode, Amy Thomas and Zeta Short, they talked about Gene Simmons.
Yeah.
And how much they find her very underrated. So you can go and check that out. Be sure to subscribe to the podcast, Apple, Spotify, however you listen to podcasts. YouTube, if you're watching us on YouTube, be sure to subscribe, hit that like button, all that fun stuff. Follow us on social media, Facebook, Twitter, Instagram, Blue Sky, X marks the spot, wherever
Twitter.
we are.
It's Twitter.
TikTok.
I don't care.
Yeah. You can email us insessionfilm@gmail.com. We would love to hear your thoughts and your feedback about the show.
Yeah.
I believe that's it, Brendan.
Yeah.
Or In Session Film Store, I'll mention that one more time.
Yeah.
We have some fun stuff up there. Go and check it out. And pretty soon we'll have one of these bad boys up there for you to go and
It's a
and
beauty.
get as well.
I can't wait to wear that on stage when I'm gigging with my band.
All right.
Yeah.
Do you have any final thoughts, my friend?
Huge congrats to my good friend Brian Shaw, who also happens to be the best man in my upcoming wedding, but he is getting married this week. So I have to travel all the way to good old Indiana, the state of Indiana, for his wedding this week, which means I am going to be tired when I return, JD. Just FYI.
Absolutely. Well, have fun with that. There is nothing in Indiana except weddings, so you're lucky that you're going there for the only thing they have.
And from what I understand, where they're getting married, the town is actually kind of cute. It's not too far from Indianapolis. In fact, it's technically considered a greater suburb of that.
Okay, nice.
So we're pretty close to the really the only major city in that state. So
yeah, that's exciting. Do hope that goes well for you.
Yeah. Same.
As far as my last final thought here, real quick, For those of you that have been longtime listeners of the show, you may know that I am a big hockey guy.
That is true.
I've played hockey my entire life, mostly goalie, but after a couple of knee dislocations and surgery, I am no longer playing goalie.
Nope.
It's been a year since the last time I was on the ice. I had surgery last November and have been doing recovery since then. This last weekend, I skated for the first time in over a year.
Your leg is still intact.
And look, nothing terrible happened, thankfully. Now, I didn't fall down, so I don't know what that'll be like when we get there. But in terms of skating, it was great. I'm terribly out of shape. So I got to work on my conditioning. But, I was able to get my edges. I was able to skate. Worked on my shot a little bit. It was a fun time.
Okay,
it
so
was good.
Baby steps.
Baby steps,
or baby skates.
Baby skates. Absolutely. So I'm hoping to get back into the swing of things here in about a month or so.
Yeah, well,
that's my plan.
Best of luck to you. Don't hurt yourself again.
Definitely, yeah.
I told you. I think I told you last week. If you hurt yourself and can't come to my wedding, then
that'll be a problem.
That'll be a problem.
We won't be doing that. We won't be doing that. At any rate, thanks for listening, everybody. Thanks for watching. We will see you all next time on the In Session Film Podcast. Oh, Tiff, we love you.
Good lady. She's a good lady.
Mm-hmm.